If you spend any time at all scrolling through health and wellness spaces, you're going to run into the reishi mushroom.
Oh, it's everywhere.
It's absolutely everywhere. It's got this reputation that, it spans centuries. It's earned this majestic traditional title, the mushroom of immortality, or Lingzi.
And the claims today are just as grand.
They're enormous. We're talking longevity, powerful anti-aging effects, a major boost to mental clarity. And because of all this hype, there's a huge commercial boom.
Which means there's also a ton of confusing, contradictory noise out there.
And that's exactly what we're here to do today.
Right. Our mission in this deep dive is to be your filter. We're going straight to the most trustworthy, high certainty research we can find.
So that means randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses.
A mess stuff. We need to figure out what the robust human data actually supports, and just as importantly, where the evidence just falls flat and these claims are more like modern fables.
Absolutely. So before we even get into the effects, we have to understand the players involved here. When we talk about the power of Ganoderma lucidum, what are we actually talking about?
That is the key to understanding all of this. It's not just about mushroom powder. You're tracking two primary groups of active compounds.
Okay.
On one side, you've got the polysaccharides, specifically the glucans.
Right.
These are large sugar molecules, and they're often linked to those immune-modulating effects we hear so much about.
And on the other side?
You have the triterpenoids. These include things like the ganoderic acids. They're responsible for, say, anti-inflammatory properties, and, crucially, that really intense bitter taste you get from a good extract.
And the main point here, the thing you need to remember, is that the effectiveness of any reishi product depends entirely on how much of these two compounds are in it.
And how they were processed to get them out in the first place, which we'll definitely circle back to.
It's a huge point.
It is. Knowing those two components helps us structure the evidence. So let's start where the data is strongest. We'll look at the area where the evidence is, I'd say, most consistent and reliable: immune support.
Okay.
This is where we see moderate certainty about a clear, reproducible biological effect in actual humans.
This is where the chemistry really translates into action in the body. You see these highly consistent results showing that reishi reliably alters immune biomarkers right there in the bloodstream.
That's right. Multiple randomized clinical trials have established this. Reishi consistently changes the counts and the function of some really crucial immune cells.
So what are we talking about specifically?
We see increases in peripheral T cell counts, what immunologists would call your CD3 plus cell, CD4 plus CR, and CD8 plus cells.
So your helper cells, your killer cells, that whole team.
That whole team. And we also see increases in natural killer, or NK, cell counts.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. You said the big glucans are the drivers here. So how are they actually signaling to the immune system to, ramp things up?
It's a really fascinating mechanism. It comes down to something called pattern recognition.
Sounds complicated.
It sounds like jargon, but it's pretty simple. The Beta-glucans in the mushroom cell walls have a structure that our immune cells recognize as foreign. It's like a little flag that says, hey, pay attention to me.
So they're not directly killing anything. They're just putting the immune system on high alert.
Precisely. They're getting it ready to fight. And we have a fantastic specific example of this from a really high-quality 2023 randomized control trial.
Yeah.
Researchers gave healthy adults a very specific, purified Reishi buccan capsule, just 200 milligrams a day for 12 weeks.
And the result there really captures what you're talking about.
It really does. They saw significant increases across all those T-cell and NK cell types we just mentioned.
But the big number.
The big number was the NK cell functional killing capacity. It jumped by an incredible 83.1% in that trial group compared to the placebo. That's a massive biological change.
That finding is robust. It's clearly working. But now comes the critical caveat that we really have to hammer home.
This is so crucial. While the effect on these biomarkers, the cell counts, the killing capacity is clear, we call this moderate certainty evidence. The ultimate clinical relevance is still unproven.
So what does that mean for you in the real world?
It means we don't have the big studies yet to show that these higher cell counts actually translate into a hard clinical endpoint. Like, does it reduce the number of times you catch a cold each year?
So reishi is demonstrably boosting the engine, but we can't say for sure yet if it makes the car drive faster or crash less often.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Okay. So moving past the immune response, let's shift gears a bit. What are the subjective side of things? Does it actually make you feel better? I'm talking about quality of life and fatigue.
For symptomatic relief, the evidence is there, but it's generally of a lower certainty.
Why is that?
The trials are just smaller, and they tend to focus on very specific, often compromised populations. But even with that, you can see some noticeable positive trends.
And where do we see the clearest signal for reducing fatigue?
Two main areas. First, in people dealing with cancer-related fatigue, there is a pilot RCT that showed improved physical well-being and reduced fatigue scores in breast cancer patients.
And they were using Reishi spore powder.
Right. 3 grams a day for 4 weeks. And that's significant because cancer-related fatigue can be just debilitating, and it's often really poorly managed.
It is. So what was the second area?
The second area connects more to that feeling of general malaise. Another RCT used a really high dose of a polysaccharide extract, 5.4 grams a day for 8 weeks.
Wow, it's a lot.
It's a big dose. And they gave it to patients diagnosed with something called neurasthenia.
Neurasthenia, that's an older term, isn't it?
It is. It's a syndrome diagnosis that basically covers persistent chronic fatigue, physical weakness, muscle aches. Just a general feeling of being totally drained.
Got it. And what did they find?
In that trial, they found a statistically and clinically meaningful reduction in the overall fatigue scores compared to placebo.
So it suggests there might be a supportive role here, maybe for certain chronic fatigue conditions.
Exactly. But again, the certainty level is still low just because we have a limited number of these smaller trials.
Okay, so it's encouraging to see movement on biomarkers and some symptomatic relief. But now, let's turn to the claims that really fill the shelves at the health food store.
The big ones.
We have to address what drives this massive commercial market. You see, Reishi pitched everywhere as a metabolic wonder drug, or even a path to eternal youth. So let's dive into metabolic health and longevity.
This is where we need to be really critical, and where the data gives us a necessary dose of reality. For metabolic health, like managing cardiovascular risk factors, the evidence is, well, it's overwhelmingly weak.
We're talking about the primary targets here: blood pressure, cholesterol.
Exactly. Large, well-conducted RCTs, including a big Cochrane review from a few years back, they all conclude the same thing. There is no support for a clinically meaningful benefit for these markers.
So, if you're listening, you should not be relying on Reishi to replace your statin or your blood pressure medication.
Absolutely not. The evidence just isn't there. However, there is some fascinating nuance when you start digging into the more recent comprehensive meta-analyses.
Okay, so what did they find?
They pulled data from dozens of smaller trials, and they found statistically significant, though very modest, effects on secondary markers.
Such as?
A small mean reduction in BMI, about 0.43 kilograms per square meter, and a slight drop in resting heart rate by about 4 beats per minute.
That's statistically significant, you said, but is it clinically significant? It sounds pretty small.
It is small, which is why we can't advocate for it as a primary treatment. But the interesting part was that the benefits seemed a bit more pronounced in certain subgroups.
Really?
Yeah, specifically in younger adults, so people under 50, and surprisingly, with lower daily doses, usually under about 1,400 milligrams a day.
Huh. That's counterintuitive.
It is. It suggests that if there is a mechanism here, it might be more preventative or supportive rather than corrective for an existing condition.
That's fascinating. But we have to move on to the biggest claim of all, the one that gave it the name: longevity. Does the mushroom of immortality actually extend human lifespan?
This is the moment to deploy that critical filter we promised. Let's just be blunt.
Please do.
If you are buying Reishi because the label promises immortality, you are buying a fable. The human data for lifespan extension is not low certainty. It is a literal blank page. It's zero.
Zero human data.
Zero human data demonstrating lifespan extension. All the claims about longevity or anti-aging are based purely on preclinical work.
So studies in animals or cell models.
Exactly. We're talking about things like life extension in a tiny little worm called C. elegans or some anti-aging markers in mice. And those findings are interesting for future research, but they are irrelevant to human longevity today.
That is a massive evidence gap.
It's a huge gap that needs to be flagged every single time this claim is made.
Okay, that definitely puts the mushroom of immortality into a much clearer perspective. It's a great traditional name, but scientifically, we just can't make that jump.
Not at all.
So if we accept the moderate evidence for immune support and maybe some of that fatigue relief, the next question is a practical one. How do you, the consumer, actually pick a product that has the active compounds the trials used. Because just buying Reishi powder doesn't guarantee anything, does it?
No, it truly doesn't. This is where the chemistry and the preparation separate potent product from, frankly, an inert one.
You mentioned this earlier. It's about the extraction.
It's all about the extraction because the two main compounds require totally different methods.
So explain that difference again.
Okay, think about it this way. The polysaccharides, those Beta-glucans for your immune system, are water-soluble. They're like sugar. They dissolve beautifully in hot water.
So you need a hot water extraction, like making a really strong boiled tea.
Precisely. But the triterpenoids, the bitter ones with anti-inflammatory potential, they're lipophilic. They're like oil.
So water won't work.
Water won't touch them. You need alcohol or fat to pull them out. So to get the full spectrum of benefits, you have to have what's called a dual extraction.
Dual extraction. That's the key phrase to look for.
It's essential. If a product only used hot water, you're missing all the triterpenoids.
And if you just have raw powder, you're not getting much of either.
Bioavailability is often really low. The good stuff is locked inside these incredibly tough cell walls. So consumers need to look for standardized products that specify the percentage of these compounds.
What are the ideal numbers?
Ideally, you want to see Beta-glucan content over 20% and triterpenoids over 2%.
And what's a big red flag on a label? A warning sign for a low-quality product.
Avoid anything that's ambiguously labeled as just polysaccharides without specifying Beta-glucans, and be really wary of products that rely heavily on mycelium on grain. It's a cheaper manufacturing method. They grow the mycelium on rice or oats, and the final product often contains huge amounts of starch filler from that grain instead of the active compounds. You're buying expensive rice flour with a little fungus in it.
That is a huge practical takeaway. Let's quickly give some concrete dosing examples from the successful trials because the doses really vary a lot.
Absolutely. For the immune biomarker effects, that high-quality 2023 trial used just 200 milligrams a day of a purified glucan extract.
Very small dose.
Tiny dose because it was so concentrated. But then for the Neurasthenia trial, they used a huge dose, 5.4 grams a day of a polysaccharide extract.
And the cancer fatigue trial.
That one used 3 grams a day of the spore powder, so you can see the form matters immensely.
It's fascinating how a purified product is effective at 200 milligrams, but a Brader extract needs grams.
It's all about concentration and form. And one last note on that spore powder. The spores are super rich in triterpenoids, but the label must say shell broken or sporoderm removed. If that tough outer shell isn't broken open, your body just can't access the compounds inside. It's nearly useless otherwise.
Okay, this has been mostly good news for, adjunct support, but we have to end this with a very strong and necessary caution about safety and interactions.
We do. This is critical, especially if you're taking other medications.
But what's the general safety profile look like?
The good news is that short-term use, like what we see in clinical trials, is generally very well tolerated. The most common side effects are mild GI upset, dry mouth, maybe a minor headache.
So for a healthy adult using it for a few months, the risk is low.
The general profile is good. However, there are a few clinically significant warnings that you absolutely must heed.
Let's start with the liver.
Yes. While it's rare, there have been reports of acute liver hepatotoxicity, usually with long-term use. So if you have active liver disease, you should avoid reishi entirely.
And the most crucial warning we have to talk about involves blood thinners.
This one is non-negotiable. Reishi shows clear antiplatelet and anticoagulant activity. It interferes with blood clotting.
So if you're taking something like warfarin, or even just daily aspirin.
Caution is absolutely mandatory. Your doctor should know, and they'll likely recommend INR monitoring to check your clotting time. And because of this bleeding risk, it must be stopped before any scheduled surgery.
How long before?
Ideally 1 to 2 weeks before. You don't want to take any chances.
And finally, what about the immune system? We said it's an immune stimulant.
Right. It puts your immune cells on alert. So there's a theoretical risk if you are on medication designed to suppress your immune system.
Like after an organ transplant.
Exactly. Or for a severe autoimmune condition. In those cases, you should avoid reishi. Its stimulating effects could work against the medication that's designed to keep your immune system quiet.
So after all that, what's our final verdict for you, the learner?
I think it's pretty clear.
Reishi is best characterized not as some miraculous cure for aging, but as a supportive nutraceutical. We have moderate evidence for specific immune biomarker changes and some small benefits for things like fatigue.
But it is not a longevity drug.
It is not a longevity drug, and it is not a replacement for therapies designed to treat high blood pressure or high cholesterol.
That's the high-level takeaway. And we have to reiterate that major research gap we found.
Right.
The positive trials show these robust changes in biomarkers, like cell counts. But we still urgently need those big, long-term trials that focus on hard clinical endpoints.
We need to prove that those extra immune cells actually lead to fewer infections or better long-term survival rates.
We need to connect the dots.
Exactly. And to leave you with a final thought for reflection, let's tie it all back to that practical science we discussed. Think about how sensitive this mushroom is to how it's processed. We know that certain heat treatments can actually increase the final Beta-glucan content and boost antioxidant properties. It's not as simple as just grinding up raw material.
The manufacturing know-how is everything.
It is. So the question isn't just what mushroom you consume, but how that mushroom was dried and processed before it ever even reached the capsule. What aspect of this complex manufacturing process do you think has the largest impact on a product's final potency?